So the other day I was watching a conversation between the clinical psychologist Ron Siegel and the chiropractor Sue Morter. They were talking about awakening experiences, and Siegel commented that, it's kind of a joke amongst his clinical psychologist colleagues that if you have a patient who comes in who says, I just learned that I'm God and that you're God and that this tree is God, that's a good thing. That's, something they can work with. But it's totally different from a patient who comes in and says, I just learned that I'm God and you're not. Now, this notion of believing oneself to be God can be a common feature in both schizophrenia and spiritual awakening. The psychologist David Lukoff, who's an expert in spiritual emergencies, had an experience in his 20s wherein he thought that he was the reincarnation of both Buddha and Jesus, an experience that he's described as both a total psychotic episode as well as a spiritual awakening. What I want to talk about here today is what differentiates those two versions of believing oneself to be God. Believing that you're God and nobody else is, or believing that everyone and everything is God. And what Sue Morter said in the conversation that Siegel seemed to really agree with was that what it comes down to is this idea of being embodied or being grounded. If one has an experience like this, but they're all up in their head and just kind of seeing everything still from this really logical, rational, kind of dualistic standpoint, they're much more likely to see that they're God and nobody else is. On the other hand, if that person were more grounded and balanced, they'd be able to integrate that experience using their whole body. They'd be able to process it, not just with the mind, but with the neural networks in the heart and gut as well. Now, I was telling my mom about this. My mom was a psych nurse for 30 plus years, and she was telling me that early in her career, she was working at a day treatment facility where she saw a lot of patients with schizophrenia, and that her supervisor there was really keen on getting those folks to become more embodied. It was his view that these patients were just totally disconnected from what was going on in their body. And so when they struggled to express emotions about something that in an otherwise healthy and balanced person would bring about an emotional response, he would tell them to really focus in on what was going on in their body, what sensations they felt, where they felt it, things like that, as a means of drawing them out from just being in their mind and helping them to become more grounded. This in turn led me to recall something that I once heard Terence McKenna say, which was about how venturing into the psychic realm with a purely intellectual motivation can be risky because things might, go off the rails and you might be exposed to things or see things you didn't particularly want to. On the other hand, going up there from a much more heart-centric place, I think McKenna mentioned shamans at this point, you're much more likely to kind of protect yourself when you have that connection to the heart. And I think that's another key difference in the whole spiritual awakening versus psychosis and schizophrenia paradigm. And that's the degree to which one is connected to their heart. If your heart is open, there's a much greater chance that your experiences in the psychic realm are going to lead to personal and spiritual growth. Whereas if it's closed, you risk getting lost there, which brings me back to that Joseph Campbell quote that I love that I already brought up in the first video of this series, but where he says that the psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight. That's all for today. Obviously, there's a lot more to say on this, and hopefully we'll get to that soon. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. Obviously, it was a bit different than the previous ones, which were all longer and structured and serialized, and this one was a bit more casual. So let me know which style you prefer, if you want a mix of both or what have you. Anyway, I appreciate you for watching, and Happy New Year.